So, about 2 years ago, my Nana brought home a Ouija board that she found at a yard sale. I have always been a true believer in the paranormal, and it's always been one of my peak interests. I have heard and read enough stories and watched enough shows to know not to mess around with a Ouija board, and quite frankly, they kind of freaked me out, so I wanted nothing to do with it. My Nana, on the other hand, doesn't believe in the paranormal whatsoever, and thought it would just be a fun game for myself, my brother, and the oldest of my two cousins. I left it on the dining room table for days before she made me put it away. I ended up sliding it under my bed in hopes of just forgetting about it. My brother, age 11, and my cousin, age 12, bugged me about it constantly because they wanted to play with it, and I wouldn't let them. I tried to explain to them it wasn't just a game and that it shouldn't be messed with, but they were preteen boys who couldn't help but do things they shouldn't do. One day, after I got home from work, the boys were there, and I had this sneaking suspicion they played with it. I looked under my bed, and it was there, but I had this odd feeling about it. That's when I went downstairs and interrogated them about it. At first they denied it, but I saw right through them, and they eventually admitted that they had played with it. I asked them if they had said goodbye when they were done, and they said they did. My cousin likes to over-exaggerate stories big time and make things up and be overly dramatic. So when he told me about a couple of things that supposedly happened, I didn't believe him at all. Also, they were boys who liked to mess with each other, so I assumed that's what was happening. Anyways, a couple of nights later I got in bed, and as I lay there trying to fall asleep, I get this feeling that I'm being watched. I looked over at my closet, and I notice one of the doors is slightly opened, leaving a small space between the doors. It creeped me out for some reason, so I turned and faced the other way, trying to ignore everything and fall asleep. I finally fell asleep, and the next thing I know, I'm woken up by what felt like someone or something hitting me in the back of the head. And it wasn't a light hit either. It freaked me out so much I was shaking. I look around my room and I don't see anything. But then, all of a sudden, I hear my floor creaking like someone is walking around my bed. I'm so freaked out at this point it wasn't funny. After laying there for a good little while, I finally got the courage to get up and grab my phone and book it to my living room. I sat down and tried to calm down. I could still feel a tingling, pulsating sensation on the back of my head. I turned on my phone and realized it's 3 in the morning. I called my boyfriend, with tears streaming down my face from being so freaked out. He didn't pick up, and I swear I called him another 15 to 20 times before I finally gave up. I sat in the chair until my Nana got up around 6. I didn't tell her what happened because I knew she wouldn't believe me and would say I was acting stupid. After she got up, I had breakfast and then called my boyfriend again, and he finally picked up. He told me he had his phone on silent, so he didn't know I had been calling. I told him what happened, and he felt so bad he felt like an idiot for having his phone on silent. He told me he would have come over in a heartbeat to comfort me, and was so apologetic. Later that day, he came over, and we took the Ouija board to a junkyard to get rid of it. My boyfriend is the only one in my family that knows what happened, and I didn't experience anything again after I got rid of the Ouija board. Moral of the story: Ouija board should not be messed with. This happened to me the other night, and spooked me pretty good, especially with everything that's going on right now. I had spent most of the evening visiting my mom at her house, and at 2:30 a.m. left to go back to my place to get ready for work. I was driving up a major state route that goes through the southeast side of the city we live in that also stretches for miles beyond the city limits. The roads were pretty much deserted, and the only other person out with me was a small black Chevy that was following me a little close. Enough for me to take notice, but not give it much thought, and I kept driving, lost in my own thoughts. We came up on an intersection where the road widens a bit, and when it did, The black Chevy changed lanes and picked up their speed in order to pass me, to which I thought, good riddance, get off my bumper. But when we got to the next intersection that was shortly beyond this one, they were still driving beside me and keeping pace with my car. I looked over and saw 4 young guys, late teens to early 20s, all staring at me, and something in my gut told me to floor it once the light changed. I stomped on the gas when the light changed, but instead of leaving the Chevy in the dust, I was horrified to watch in my side mirror as they sped up as well and continued to match my speed. I didn't dare look them straight on, but at one point when they were still beside me, the guy in the front passenger seat opened his window and was shouting and waving something in his hand at me, which I saw out of the corner of my eye and proceeded to freak out and pounded on the gas even harder. I called 911 as soon as our little chase started and had to be transferred to 3 different police departments as they continued to keep pace with me and chase me through 3 different jurisdictions before I finally lost them at a traffic light. At one point before the drop-off, they got behind me once again and started playing this little game where they would ride my bumper, drop their speed and fall back, then speed back up to being on my bumper again. After they got stuck at the light, I floored it to put some distance in between us, then made a quick swerve into a side street in a dark neighborhood and got lost. Winding my way through a few more neighborhoods and eventually ending back up in the jurisdiction of the 2nd Police Department I talked to that night. 2 officers agreed to come find me, and I crouched in my little hiding spot with the lights and car off, seat reclined so I could duck down. Once the officers showed up, I gave my statement and a description of the car, and the 2 officers agreed to follow me as far as the city limit before turning around. I made it home with no further issues, and 2 out of the 3 police departments issued a be on the lookout for the car. Be safe, guys. It's crazy out there. When I was 19, my parents went out of town and I stayed home. I had every opportunity to go with them, but the idea of spending 6 hours in the car and then 3 days in a musty hotel with questionable linen was deeply unappealing to me. I'd stayed in the house by myself many times before, and we lived in a fairly safe area, so I felt perfectly comfortable staying with just me and my 2 dogs, an elderly wiener dog named Logan, and a barely out of puppyhood Belgian Shepherd named Dante. In fact, I was glad to be able to sit on the couch in front of the good TV, instead of huddled on my bed with the little TV with the fucked up screen. The second night my parents were gone, I was sitting in the living room and it was only about 11 o'clock. I had just taken Dante out and had settled back in to continue my Harry Potter marathon when the front door opened. We had a security system that dinged loudly when any door or window was opened, and it always set off a barking fit in Logan. It did this time, and I heard a male voice say, "Shut up, Logan, you stupid fucking mutt." It was not a voice I recognized, and I immediately noped the fuck out, bolting out the side door without even grabbing my phone or putting on my shoes. Dante followed me out of the door, but to my knowledge, Logan never even poked his head out of his crate. I would have been shocked if he had. He was old and cranky. My neighborhood was shaped like a horseshoe with 5 houses and a wooded lot in the middle. The house next to mine was occupied by complete assholes. The house next to that was empty, and the house next to it was occupied by a retired cop, and the lights were on, and I headed toward it at a dead run, running through cold mud, sticker bushes, and nothing more than a nightshirt. Right before I reached the tree line, I looked back toward my house. The front of my house had a row of windows, and I could clearly see a man standing in the dining room. He had a short, dark beard, and I think his hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and he was wearing a dark green hoodie. I made it to the house and pounded on the door and explained to my neighbor what had happened. He immediately got his gun and his phone and called the police, making me and Dante stay on the porch with his oldest son, who was probably a little older than me. I was frankly terrified, and I couldn't stop shaking. Dante was having the time of his life, having made a new friend in the form of the neighbor's son. The cops got there fairly quickly, and they and my neighbor did a quick search of the house and found nothing except the front door gaping open and some muddy footprints out on the porch that clearly didn't match mine. The cops asked me some questions, but it mostly boiled down to, it's someone you know. He knows your dog. But I know for a fact that that guy wasn't anyone I knew. Neither his voice or his face was familiar. The cops brushed me off, likely just thinking I was some batty chick. However, they did say they would have a car roll by once or twice during the night. I ended up going back to my house and locking myself in my bedroom, clutching my dad's pistol. To this day, I have no idea who that guy was. He, thankfully, never came back, and nothing ever came of the police report. Everyone else sort of brushed it off, but I had a hard time. The guy had known my dog's name, so it wasn't like it was random. For a long time after that night, I'd have nightmares about the stupid ding the doors made when they opened. I'd be half asleep and jolt awake, hearing that stupid sound, even after we had moved out of that house. Despite the fact that nothing really happened, it was hard for me not to imagine what could have happened. At the time, I was a fairly petite girl, so my mind always went to the darkest scenarios. Hiking alone always used to be a great way for me to clear my head, have some time alone, and get a workout in as well. After what happened this morning, I doubt I will ever hike alone again. It was around 6 a.m., and I was surprised that it was as light as it was, so I decided to go earlier than I had originally planned. I have hiked this trail many times because it's so close to the area I live in, which is Colorado Rocky Mountains. For anyone looking to identify region-specific creatures, both alone and with a group of people, I have never had an experience in this canyon, though I have heard that it is haunted, as many Native Americans are rumored to be buried all along the canyon, which is peppered with many hiking trails and a beautiful drive. I set off on my hike, and nothing was out of the ordinary. There were only two people I encountered, a woman who was running down the trail and a man birdwatching. I got past the main flat part of the trail where there was a big clearing, and I could see about 100 feet in every direction, and into the more heavily wooded area with a steep hill to my left and a creek to my right. Around this time is when I started hearing someone shouting. It sounded very far off, and I couldn't distinguish any words. I figured maybe someone was calling for their dog or someone else. It came and went intermediately, as if it was on the wind, but I did notice that the voice was saying the same thing over and over again, in a strange intonation that sounded almost sing-song. I was not afraid at this time, with it being light out and having seen other people on the trail. I stopped to take a couple of pictures right off of the main trail. The light was gorgeous and hitting the water and greenery beautifully, and then began walking again. Maybe 5 minutes later is when I heard it. The same voice I had heard earlier, except it sounded as if it was directly above me on the slope. I instantly felt a chill and began looking around for the source of the noise, but I couldn't see anyone. It was close enough that even through the summer foliage, I should have been able to see the person. If it was a person. I could still not make out what the voice was saying, but it was a 2-syllable word. At this point, I wondered if it was a psycho looking for a young female hiker to murder, as that's often something I worry about when I hike alone. I bolted back down the way I came, practically running down the trail. I heard a crash behind me, as if something heavy landed on tree branches and cracked them. I've spent most of my life in and around forest animals. I know what deer and smaller creatures sound like, and this sounded much bigger and much clumsier, like what people sound like when they go through the undergrowth. Again, I was still thinking that I was going to have an untimely demise on my morning hike from some serial killer, and I picked up my pace, hoping to outrun whoever now seemed to be chasing me. Luckily, I didn't see anyone chasing after me, and the voice seemed to stay in the same location. It may have just been the panic of the situation, but I could have sworn that the voice changed its unintelligible word to my name as I ran away from it, which is one syllable, and just drew it out long with the same intonation. It was odd, as if it was just going, K, K. It was at this moment that I realized that I might not be dealing with a psycho at all, but something paranormal, because no one out there should have known my name. After I reached the main flat area of the trail, the voice disappeared completely. I made it to my car in about 15 minutes. I hadn't gotten very far on my hike, and drove up the road. The road runs parallel to the trail for almost a mile across the creek, and so I was hoping to see if I could see anyone from a slightly higher perspective. I didn't see anyone, and drove to a different location to finish my hike somewhere a lot more populated. Nothing else strange happened, though I was still shaken up, and trying to convince myself it was someone calling for their dog. Now, I have some theories. Because I said the entire canyon is rumored to be haunted, it may have been a ghost of some sort, but because of the Native Americans that inhabited the area for a long time, I wondered if it may have been a Wendigo. From my knowledge, I know they can imitate human voices, but I'm not sure if they would know my name. I'm a little freaked out, especially because this haunted canyon is only miles from my house. Any help would be much appreciated. Thank you. Let me first give some backstory. When I was in my late 20s, I had a job as a corrections officer at the local county jail. I'm a female, so I was assigned to female cells mostly. I soon became a favorite of the ladies because of my easygoing nature. Anyone can make a mistake, so I treated them as a person and not like a number. Most of the inmate population seemed to be late teens to early 20s, and I guess they found me relatable. After my training period, I worked my cell block alone. I mostly worked in the closed pod. These ladies were in their cells for 21 hours a day, only coming out for 3 one-hour recreation periods, one in the morning, one after lunch, and the last one at night. There was 4 different groups ranging from 3 inmates to 25 inmates. After being on the job for a month, I started hearing some of the women on my shift mention hating the night shift because it was spooky. I kind of laughed it off. Boy, was I in for it. Just so happens my next shift was the night shift. After an altercation, I locked down early that night. I had just come back from my break a little after 12:30 a.m., and my sergeant had just left the pod. I had to scan at 1 a.m., and it's not unusual for inmates to be sitting on their bunks reading at this time. At the back of the pod is where we put those in isolation. Some were for infractions, and some were for mental issues. When I left for my break, it was empty, so I was surprised to see someone sitting on the bunk of the isolation R1 reading. I asked if she was okay, and she smiled and nodded her head and said, "Yes, ma'am. Just reading my book." I said okay and went about my duties. All during my scans that night, she was sitting there reading, and we would speak. She was the only inmate up that night, so I stopped my last scan before my 4:30 a.m. break and told her my sergeant was coming in if she needed anything. When my sergeant walked in, I told her all was quiet, that everyone was asleep except for the girl in isolation that came in during my break. She looked puzzled and told me no one came in. I told her that girl in room 1. I said I've talked to her several times, and we walked down to the room. When I tell you that room was empty, I almost lost it. I swore to her I wasn't crazy. She smiled and told me that 2 years prior to me coming to work there, a young lady had a seizure and died in the room. Apparently most of the COs and even a few inmates have seen her. Okay, so this happened to me earlier, and I don't think I'll be sleeping tonight. I'm currently staying in a remote part of the United Kingdom and having a break from working, which means more time to pursue my hobbies, one being photography. I had scoped out a creepy-looking tree formation in a nearby forest and set my camera and tripod up as the sun was coming down, for that extra creepy vibe. As I'm happily taking photos, I see a woman pass the entrance of the arched trees. This woman had parked her car next to mine when I arrived. She went past me a couple of times, looking at me for prolonged periods with each time she passed. I assume she wants to come up this path but sees that I'm taking photos, so decides to walk elsewhere. Approximately 5 minutes go by and she appears again, this time walking towards me, dragging her left side slightly with this strange limp. She stops once and stares at me for a few seconds, then starts walking towards me again. I ask her if she's okay, and she starts grunting at me, then stops and stares again. It's at this point that this woman is close enough for me to realize that she's actually a man in a woman's clothing, with a wig. An uncomfortable moment passes and she starts grunting again, walks towards the edge of the path, grabs a pile of leaves and starts throwing them around, grunts some more and then walks off aimlessly into the forest. I call my friend to tell her what has happened and ask that she stays on the phone in case this person comes back. I'll just take a couple more photos and then I'm out. For a good 10 minutes, I hear the crunching of leaves circling me in the forest, and I just convince myself that it's wildlife. Then, silence. I take the photos, and I haven't seen or heard the person for around 15 minutes now. I leave the path and see that the car is gone. Thank fuck. However, I very quickly notice that there is a man walking towards me from the entrance. It's the same fucking guy. He has changed into men's attire, and as he walks past me, he shoots me a grin that sends shivers down my spine. I don't scare easily, but this guy just gave off all the wrong signals, causing this overwhelming feeling of dread to wash over me. I'm still on the phone at this point and holding my tripod over my shoulder, just in case. I quickened my pace and got back into my car. As I did so, I saw him come out of the lane I had been down, stop and look around, then start walking towards my car with intent. I video for a while and then haul the fuck out of there, driving past his car that had moved down the road and thinking, what in the graybeard fuck just happened? Limping, leaf-throwing, forest stalker? I hope we don't meet again. This story occurred in September of 2018 at one of my first college parties. Being the anxious wreck that I am in all social situations, I pre-gamed quite heavily to try to alleviate the anxiety I felt around my new college friends and large parties in general. I took a few extra shots before we left since one of my best friends from home had been there with me that weekend. I was beyond excited to show her the social scene at my new university, and I didn't want to have my inhibitions once we rolled up. When we arrived, I was already much more inebriated than I had let on to any of my 3 friends I came with, but I was so eager to demonstrate how fun I could be in college that I ended up having a few more beers, quite a few more that I'd had in years. I promptly blacked out around midnight, so in telling this story, I lose nearly all recollection of what actually happened to me. I have a flash of memory where I am leaving the party after it ended, being physically supported by my 3 friends in order to make the walk back to our dorm. I lose most, if not all, of my memory at this point in the events. According to my friends, a man they had never met before, but who appeared to be around our age and relatively normal, walked up to the 4 of us as we were heading back to the dorm and began chatting with us. Nothing particularly out of the ordinary for a group of college girls on a Friday night, except for his intense fixation on me, clearly much more intoxicated than the rest of the group. After a few minutes of innocuous conversation, he suddenly started encouraging me to go back with him to his apartment, telling my friends that I would make it home just fine and that he was trustworthy. Apparently, I seemed interested in the idea for reasons that neither my friends or I can discern, slurring back a "sure" and "cool" every few sentences. My friends, of course, told him that there was no way I'd be going with him and attempted to walk away faster than he could keep up. But, like all bona fide creeps, he couldn't be deterred. For the entire 3-block walk back to my dorm, he escalated his behavior and kept trying to talk to me, grab my arm, touch my hair, or just generally engage in predatory behavior. Then we arrived back at the dorm, which was locked to everyone that didn't have a key card specifically for the building, so my friends rushed inside with me in tow, thinking they had escaped the creepy guy. Instead of being locked out, though, he tailgated so close to my arm that when my friends and I went through the doors, he followed immediately after. My best friend from home is far from afraid of confrontation, so she told him in no uncertain terms to fuck off and attempted to drag me to the elevator. I'm mostly unclear on what happened here, but it seems that as the elevator was closing, he told me to come out, and for some reason, blackout drunk me thought he was the authority on where I'd be going. I crept out of the elevator at the last second, and apparently, he ushered me out of the door as my friends went up the 8 floors to my room, helpless to stop me from leaving. My memories kick in here. I remember the second we got outside. There was an Uber waiting for us as we had been there for a few moments. I remember him opening the door and gently guiding me in. When we started driving, I think I asked him where we were going. I was gripped with a horrible anxiety, total disorientation, with the motion of the car slurring all of my visuals outside. He told me we were going to his apartment 5 miles away, on the far west side of campus. I don't remember much else from the car ride, except that it took nearly 20 minutes, and I kept asking him who he was and where we were going, because I couldn't remember. After getting out of the car, which I know we did, I have only one memory, which is vomiting from being drunk for the first and only time in my life, with my vision and memory so impaired that I saw it only as an explosion of stars. According to my hometown friend, I called her crying about 20 to 25 minutes after he took me away from them at the dorm, sent her my location, and begged her to call me an Uber home, saying I didn't know where I was or who I was with. I don't remember that ride, but I do remember collapsing into my friend's arms at the entrance to my dorm. Luckily, the timestamps and phone calls proved that nothing awful happened to me, but the experience was so nauseating that I haven't gotten that drunk since, nor do I think I ever will. This wasn't too awful of an experience, and I debated posting it here, but I think it demonstrates how sickeningly normal it is for average-seeming people to have potentially malicious intentions. I am infinitely grateful for how generous and vigilant my friends were in protecting me. The creepy fuck somehow found my Instagram a few days later and requested to follow me. I hadn't known his name until he did that, but luckily now I do, and he will remain on my block list till the end of time, and boy, I hope we never meet again, for his sake, because I promise I'm a lot stronger when I'm not alcohol poisoned.